Entertaining, talking sports.
What is going on, Hoops fans? Back at it with another New York Knicks video. It's been a while, New York Knicks fans, but I'm definitely going to try to have some content up as the draft is getting going here. It's going to be here in about a week, and after that, just I think 2 days later, there's going to be free agency, and then the NBA season kicks off in about a month after that, and I actually am excited for the upcoming season for the New York Knicks. And by no means do I think that this team's headed to the playoffs. And if they are, they're not going to do any damage when they get there. But I think they're a team that's continuing to rebuild, and they're continuing to do it the right way. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the rumors about Russell Westbrook. I'm also going to talk about my thoughts on the draft as a whole and what type of players, maybe not necessarily the names, even though I'll mention some of the guys that have been talked about, but what type of players I think the New York Knicks need to bring in for this basketball team going into the 2020-2021 season, led by new head coach Tom Thibodeau. Tom Thibodeau is a guy I was actually pretty happy about. Well, a lot of Knicks fans were not, and maybe they still aren't. I was actually pretty happy when the New York Knicks brought him in. He seems a lot like the head coach that I cover a lot with the New York Giants in Joe Judge. He's a guy that, he's a disciplinarian. He's a guy that expects the most out of his players. And some people are scared off by the fact that maybe free agents may not want to come here due to the fact that Thibodeau is the coach. I mean, it's been talked about that Jimmy Butler, in the end, didn't really like playing for him, even though he did come over to Minnesota from Chicago. And he is a major reason why Jimmy Butler became the player that he did, or at least a lot of people feel that way. But Thibodeau's had success with defensive-minded basketball players. And who do you have on the New York Knicks? Two of our better players in Mitch Robinson and Frank Ntilikina are guys that are defensive-driven. And I think he's only going to get more out of those players, and I expect him to try to get that out of RJ Barrett as well. Barrett's a guy that over the last month of last year really started to turn on the Jets and show you some promise headed into his sophomore season here for the New York Knicks. And he's a guy I'm really excited about and still have high aspirations for. I still think RJ Barrett could be an all-star in the NBA. No doubt about it. He's got to work on his jump shot. He's got to work on his free throw shooting. But overall, I like RJ Barrett's game, and I think a guy like Thibodeau will be able to get more out of him. Now, what do the New York Knicks need to do this offseason to try to get improvements out of those three players? Because at the end of the day, those are the three young players on this team that I think you're starting to build a team around. Not to say they're going to be the best players when we get there. I think the New York Knicks are still going to look to free agency to bring some players in, maybe via trade. I just don't think this is quite the year yet. If anything, I think you need to continue to trade away draft and add players to get draft assets, much like you did last year with Morris. Why the New York Knicks are picking 27th overall in addition to number 8 in the first round, I think they're going to need to do the same thing with the guy they brought in free agency last year in Julius Randle. And more so to do with the fact that you don't want to stunt the growth of Mitchell Robinson. Having a guy like Randle on the team is doing that, and I don't think, at least, Randle's going to be a part of the future of this New York Knicks team when we get there. I hope and think that Mitchell Robinson will be. I think Mitch has the ability to potentially be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate under Tom Thibodeau. And we'll have to wait and see how Tom does and if he sticks with the New York Knicks. But I'm excited for this upcoming season. But those are the types of things that I think the New York Knicks should be trying to do. Continue to try to bring in draft capital so you have the ability to potentially trade up. The New York Knicks, of course, in addition to this year, where they're picking 8 and 27, have a first-round pick in each of the next 3 drafts and 2 additional from the trade with the Dallas Mavericks when they traded away Kristaps Porzingis. The more draft capital you could add, the more ability you have to try to trade up and try to get premier players on your basketball team, which right now should be the goal for the New York Knicks, to try to bring in as much young talent as you possibly can. And, of course, there's been rumors now over the last couple of days about Russell Westbrook. And don't get me wrong, Russell, and it's being reported by Ian O'Connor, I've seen it on Bleacher Report, I've seen it all over, that the New York Knicks are one of the 2 or 3 teams that are potentially interested in Russell Westbrook. And I saw the same thing last year. As a matter of fact, I remember I did a video on this talking about the possibility of Russell Westbrook coming to the New York Knicks. And don't get me wrong, Russell Westbrook, an immensely talented basketball player. He's 32 years old. He's a walking triple-double. One of the best players in the game, even though he may not be my type of basketball player when it comes to the point guard position. I'm more of a traditionalist. I would much rather a guy like Chris Paul, who the New York Knicks have also been linked to. I personally am not in favor of bringing in either one. I understand the attraction to either one of those players. They're stars, and they're guys that would sell jerseys, and they're guys that people would want to show up to the stadium to go and watch, and they'd bring some excitement back to the New York Knicks. But the way I look at Russell Westbrook is this. If you bring in Russell Westbrook, make no mistake about it, it's going to add wins to the total of this, of this year's New York Knicks team. Russell Westbrook is one of the top 10 players the NBA has to offer and would certainly help us in the win department. But it hurts us long-term for a couple of reasons. One, you're trading away draft assets to get him. Two, you're tying up cap space to bring him in. Right now, the New York Knicks, and I'm not even going to get into the maturation of the other players. I'm going to get into that as well, rather. I haven't even gotten into that. But it takes away cap space to bring in younger superstars or potential superstars in the 2021 free agency class, which is what I think we should be looking for. Not a 32-year-old point guard who is about to hit the tail end of his prime when the Knicks aren't ready to compete. It just would make no sense whatsoever, and it would be a thing that the New York Knicks would do. As a matter of fact, they've done it with several point guards over the course of history, one being Stephon Marbury. We brought him in. What did it accomplish? It put the Knicks exactly where they didn't want to be. Sure, we made the playoffs for the first time in forever, and we got an 8 seed. We got swept against the Nets, and we never sniffed the playoffs after that. Bring in a guy like Westbrook, yeah, maybe we get into the playoffs. Maybe we get the 7, the 8 seed. What does it really accomplish in the grand scheme of things? And the other thing that you have to ask yourself as a New York Knicks fan, and why I don't think this makes a lot of sense, it stunts the growth of a player like R.J. Barrett. A guy like Paul, if you were going to do something like this, would make a lot more sense because he's a pass-first point guard. He's a distributor. He's a guy that maybe could actually, accelerate the process in terms of growth for a player like R.J. Barrett. Having a guy like Westbrook, a ball-dominant player, a guy that's going to look to put up 30 points a game, and a guy that has come out and said that he wants to be the star on a basketball team is actually, in my opinion, going to hurt the growth of pretty much most of the players on this roster. It's not what you want to do. It would be the worst possible acquisition that the New York Knicks could do in terms of tying up cap space and stunting the growth of other players on this roster. So I hope and think the New York Knicks will stay away from this. I think the New York Knicks are getting smarter. And if this were to happen, I think it would be James Dolan driven. I don't think that the New York Knicks would go about doing this. I think they're going to continue the rebuild, continue to bring in an influx of young talent, and then start to make moves when this team is good and ready to compete to really, try to win an NBA title. And that's what it's all about. I'm not about making the playoffs to get knocked out in the first round. In the NBA, I'd much rather be one of the bottom 5 teams than be, in the middle of the pack and getting knocked out in the first round each and every year, because then at least you have the ability to potentially bring in a top-tier player via the draft, which is what the New York Knicks have been able to do the last couple of years. They just haven't hit on the draft picks. Kevin Knox didn't really work out. If you go back in time, you would have taken a couple of other players there, but it is what it is. They need to continue to draft early, and we have to hope as Knicks fans that they hit on some of these picks and they bring in the coaching staff that could get the most out of their talents. I do like R.J. Barrett. I do like Mitch Robinson, and I actually do think that Frank Ntilikina, who actually shot 40% last year, a huge improvement, is starting to improve and maybe could carve out a niche. I'm not saying he'll even be a starter, but could carve out a niche for this New York Knicks basketball team when they get to where we need them to be. In terms of this year's drafts, the type of the players that I want the New York Knicks to look for and the type of players that I think Tom Thibodeau will be looking for the New York Knicks are, 1, defensive-minded players, but 2, we need a point guard. We need a distributor, and we also need, whether they do that in free agency or the draft remains to be seen, we also need a guy that could shoot the 3. We need to be able to open up the floor for guys like R.J. Barrett, guys like Mitch Robinson. In today's modern-day NBA, if you can't shoot the 3, you're not winning very many basketball games. And 3-and-D players are very important. It's why I wanted a guy like Bridges back when we took Kevin Knox. I thought we needed that 3-and-D player. I still think that. And I look at the NBA draft right now, and the guy that I've been looking at for a while, I've actually seen him drop down mock drafts. He's going like 11, 10, 12. I think it's pronounced Devin Vassell, or Vassell, whatever it may be, out of Florida State. He shot 42% from 3. He's a guy that could chuck it from deep. He's known as a 3-and-D guy. He's got athletic upside. He's 6'7". That's a guy I'm looking at. Now, if you're going the point guard approach, which I couldn't, I'd be completely for as well. You got guys like Tyrese Halliburton from what I've seen. He's a guy with some upside. You've got Hayes. A lot of people have talked about him as well. I think that's where the New York Knicks are looking. I think they're looking for a shooter or a distributor or a guy that hopefully could potentially eventually do both. That's where I think you're looking at, and I think you need to continue to try to hammer home with that over the course of this draft. Of course, if somebody drops that you don't expect to, well, you have to take the best player available because right now the New York Knicks need as much possible talent as they could get. But as a Knicks fan, what I want in this draft is either a distributor or a guy that could open up spacing on the floor and a guy that could shoot it from deep because that's what we need. I would love a guy like Devin Vassell, because we need a three-point shooter on this team. It's something that we didn't have. I think we shot 33% from three as a team last year. Can't happen. Needs to improve. And we need to bring in young players that could shoot it from deep. I love R.J. Barrett. R.J. Barrett's not known as being a very efficient three-point shooter. The same can be said for Ntilikina. We don't have knockdown shooters on this team. I would love to be able to find one in this year's draft. So that's what I'm looking for, shooters and distributors. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.